I'm Matt with Marine Tech, and in this video we're going to be replacing our old Furuno Autopilot with a Garmin Reactor 40 SmartPump. Decided to replace the old Autopilot because our display, even at full brightness, was black. You couldn't read the numbers, and it wasn't NEMA 2000, so we couldn't integrate it with our new Garmin displays. Started digging into what needed to be done and discovered that the fuse panel on the boat wasn't large enough to add autopilot, so we had to add a new fuse panel for that. And then stay tuned and watch the rest of the install. I'm going to be running 6-gauge wire for power and ground to this panel. That should be plenty big for what we're going to use this for. Battery switch, Perco switch. This is where battery 1 comes in. This is where battery 2 comes in, and this is our out. So this is where I need to tap in with our new power wire. So that's gonna come up from the bottom and install right here. Got my new connection on there on the common, and now we're just gonna screw all this back up. Positive cable run, and now we're gonna run our negative cable or ground. Again, this is 6-gauge wire, and we're going to come off the negative post on our block, and I'm going to follow this bundle of wires down and around, and then come up here for our negative. Feeling a lot better about what our wiring situation now. We've got our 2 bilge pumps, that's 30 amps on their whole separate fuse panel, no longer overloading our fuse panel. Alright, so our fittings for the Autopilot pump, the adapters to go from the Furuno to Garmin, finally came in. All excited, getting ready to climb in the boat to install the Autopilot finally, 27 days later. And I see a small puddle on the ground. It's like, I don't know, 95 degrees in the shop. The boat's been here for 5 days. Shouldn't be dripping any water. Of course, I reach down and touch it, and it's oil. So let's see if we can figure out where the oil is coming from, and if we need to order parts before we start working on the Autopilot. Chances are where it is, it's trim and tilt system, so we'll start by trimming up the motor, and we'll take a closer look. Our tilt cylinder is leaking. There's a nice puddle of oil on top of it. We'll have to order some seals, or I'll go down to Henkel Marine in West Ashley and get some new seals for this. This is a little more in-depth repair because you've got to pull the whole rod out and disconnect it. That'll be another fun video, how to replace the trim cylinder seals on a Yamaha 3.3 liter. This is a 225, so stay tuned for that video. Let's get on the Autopilot for now. So first step, we've got to gain access to our Autopilot pump, so we're going to remove this battery box and battery. Alright, so to get my adapters on, I'm going to really have to disconnect all of these fittings. I'm going to go ahead and put some tape marks on them so I know where my lines go. And then put one tape mark on our compensating line, and we'll leave the other lines blank. Disconnect my pump from the boat and put it in my bin, and then disconnect all these lines because it is going to make quite a mess. I need to reuse these adapter fittings to get to our steering lines, and then I bought some fittings to go on the bottom to adapt to the Garmin brand pump. So we go to the workbench. Alright, so while I was in there working on the Autopilot, I was thinking about that puddle of oil I found. I worked for a forklift company for 13 years, and we had a lot of prototype test trucks, and I feel like part of my job was to walk around the test lab and looking for oil leaks, and I guess that's just something I got in the habit of looking for. See a puddle, investigate what it is, figure out where it came from. Hopefully that's the last puddle of oil we'll find in here for a while. It's just gonna yank out these fittings, and first thing I notice, these are 37-degree flare, also known as JIC fittings. You do not need to use any kind of sealant. Whoever previously installed this, put some sealant on the fittings. Again, you don't need to, so try to scrape all that off before we reuse them. All right, so we've got our 3 fittings out. Go grab our adapters that we're gonna put on. So I'm gonna clean up these fittings, then we're gonna go back to the boat because these are NPT, meaning they have to be tightened down until the threads are sealing. But I also have to have them oriented correctly on the new pump so I can hook up our lines. I need to go figure out how everything needs to be oriented, and then we'll tighten these fittings down with some sealant. All right, this is our Garmin SmartPump, and we're going to be attaching our steering lines here, and then our reservoir will go down on this side. And these are number 5 SAE fittings, or O-ring Boss. Let me show you what that fitting looks like, because went through quite a hassle, headache, trying to just sort all of this out, figure out what I could do to make this work. So this is an O-ring Boss fitting. It's a straight thread and it's sealed with the O-ring, and that is number 5. That describes the size and the thread. And we're going to put these into our SmartPump. We are reusing our fittings from the old pump, and that is a JIC to NPT adapter. This again is the 37-degree flare, and this is a tapered thread that seals with contact, and we're going to put some sealant on here, and that way it won't leak. All right, first step, I need to tighten this back down. I just took it off trying to figure out how I was going to do this. Yeah, I'm just going to snug this fitting down. And this is going to be our return to tank fitting. So it's SAE straight thread with an O-ring. We're going to tighten this down. And the O-ring is doing the sealing, so it doesn't have to be super tight. And then our NPT fitting is going to thread into that. So for this, I'm using some Loctite 454. It's pretty thin, runny stuff. Don't want to make too much of a mess. And this does need to be snug down more than your O-ring. Don't want to crack any fittings, but it should be snug. And then pull these plugs out, and we'll put our adapters in. 27-day wait to get these, and they were in stock at a different supplier. And again, with the O-ring, it doesn't need to be overly tight. And now I'm going to go ahead and install this in the console, so then when I hook up my hydraulic lines, I can have everything oriented correctly. Back into the console we go. Got our SmartPump. Go ahead and get some screws in here, keep it from moving on me. Alright, so this is why we've bolted the pump down first. We've got to get these things, T-fittings, oriented correctly. And I already see a problem. I can't install that T-fitting. So we'll unhook it one more time, and I'll put the T-fitting in, this out of the way, and put that first T-fitting in. So I need it facing towards me, so we're gonna have to go one full turn. Just need another 1/4 of a turn. All right, that should be pointed in the direction I need it. And I'll put the other fitting in, oriented the same way. All right. So we just need to snug this fitting down to be oriented in the same direction. All right, so snug. We got our retaining compound. I'm ready to screw this back in place, hopefully for the final time. Then we can hook up our lines and go home and bleed everything tomorrow. And these are 37-degree flare. These are just the existing lines from the boat. I believe Seastar now uses O-ring face seal. That's an SAE O-ring face seal fitting. But I did not want to have to make new hydraulic lines, so we're reusing the old ones. We've got our Garmin SmartPump installed. We have 3 lines from our helm. We've got the compensating line, or the tank, and then port and starboard. And those come down to our SmartPump where they're teed off. And then so these go back to the back of the boat. And then when our pump is providing fluid, it'll flow through those lines. And tomorrow we'll do our electrical portion, and then we're going to add fluid and bleed the system using our AMT0106 5-gallon bucket bleed kit. So now let's go ahead and run our wires, our power, and connection to the CCU, whatever that stands for, something control unit. All right, we've got our power cable, and we're going to wire it to our new fuse panel that we just installed. We have our power and ground ring terminals now, our negative bus bar. All right, we are running critically low on zip ties, so hopefully I can get this all routed with what we have left. So we've got some extra oversized hose clamps from running our bilge pump. We'll use these to secure this pile of wire. Get one on the back. That's not going anywhere. We're going to put a 40 amp fuse in the fuse block. That's what the Garmin wiring harness has in it, I guess, to deal with inrush current, to keep from blowing fuses. So we'll go with the 40. All right, so after looking in the installation instructions, this extra wire coming off of our CCU goes to our off-course alarm, which we'll install up here in the electronics box, and then it goes to the shadow drive sensor, and that disables the steering if you manually turn the steering wheel instead of having to push the cancel button on the dash. Everything I've read says the shadow drive is extremely finicky, and with our hose links the way they are, we're not going to install shadow drive right now. Maybe in 2 years, when we're tired of catching fish, we'll jump back in here and install it, but for now we'll install the off-course alarm up in the electronics box, and we'll go from there. Alright, so the alarm, we've got white to orange, and then black to blue. Alright, so that wraps up the electrical install. While we have all the fluid out of our steering system, I noticed the starboard steering cylinder seals look pretty rough. They're not leaking yet, but we've got the tools and the parts here. We're going to go ahead and replace them so they don't fail on us when we're offshore. So to the back of the boat, and we're going to do another steering cylinder job. Alright, so we've got our autopilot all plumbed up. The system's still very low on fluid, and notice these seals look really rough, so we're just going to go ahead and replace these seals. We have the parts in stock, and then we'll just fill the system up and bleed and purge all at the same time, instead of, 2 months down the road having to tear the steering cylinder apart and rebleed the system. Make sure you loosen your caps before you go try to remove your steering brackets, because you need your brackets to support the cylinder while you loosen the caps. Got a 19mm on the back side of this so we can break the torque. Alright, we have the Marine Tech Tools AMT0106. This fits all C-Star. Make sure your wrench, the pins are all the way engaged in the holes. We just need slow, steady pressure here. Alright, so that one's started to break free on me. I might be able to do it by hand the rest of the way. Alright, so we've got one end cap loose. If anything drains out, it's not going to be very much. Just whatever's in the cylinder, the lines are all dry. Now I'm going to move to the other side. Alright, didn't take much. Got it busted loose. Hopefully we can do it by hand the rest of the way. Alright. Alright. Got both end caps off. Now we can remove our steering brackets. And then we can remove our seal caps and put our new ones on. Bracket removed. We've got our new caps. Part number is HS5167. It's 2 end caps and some seals for the bleeder valves that I've never replaced. And this kit comes with a tapered piece of plastic. You put that over the threads to protect the new seal when you slide it on. A little bit of oil on our seals. Alright, so we've got both seal caps on. Now we just need to snug them down and get our support brackets back on. Alright, got one support bracket on. We'll move to the other side and get the other one tightened down. This washer, plastic, and this bracket. Everything disconnected, no fluid in the system. Parts are moving directions they shouldn't normally. Alright, before I go any further, I'm going to tighten down these caps. Again, make sure the tool is all the way engaged. Just snug it up. Now we tighten down mounting brackets. Alright, here comes Big Snug. Alrighty. That's 3/4 or 19mm for the big end of the steering bracket. And this is 5/8 on the small end. Alright, I'm snug over here. Snug over here. Alright, we are done. Alright, so we've installed our autopilot pump and we've just installed a new seal on the starboard steering cylinder, and now it's time to bleed the whole system, and we're going to do that with our bleed kit in a bucket, the AMT0106 Bleed System. It works great. Highly recommend it. We've got our helm adapter fitting. Go ahead and install that. Just finger tight. It has no ring on it. And then in our bucket, we have a 3-quart reservoir, which I'm going to go ahead and tie up out of the way. Use 2 zip ties on this. I'm going to go ahead and then connect the bottom of it to our helm. This will start the process of fluid going in, and then so you'll see some air bubbles come out. Might not happen very much, right now. Sometimes you can loosen this fitting to let the air out, but now we're going to go to the back of the boat and hook up our return lines. Alright, so this system for 2 motors has 2 separate cylinder connections. And that way you can bleed everything at one time. It's quick, neat, drip-free connections. One thing I will note, even with our skinny wrench, it's helpful to hold the bleed fittings on while you loosen the bleed ports. It just needs to go about half a turn, 3/4 of a turn. Let's get the other side and hold the fitting on when you loosen it. They do have a tendency to try to pop off. All right, on to our other motor. Again, just quick connects, drip-free connections. There's not a lot of room to work back here. All right, all of our fittings are open. Half to 3/4 of a turn, and now we'll start using the helm as a pump to circulate air and fluid through the system until all of the air is removed. And while you're doing this, you should look back at your motors and make sure they're not moving. If they're moving, it means you have a clogged bleed fitting. So we'll start to see some air. Got a whole bunch of air bubbles coming up. Again, we installed autopilot and we replaced the starboard steer cylinder seals. So there's a lot of air in the system. And we've got clean fluid going into the helm. We're just going to keep turning to starboard until we don't have any more air bubbles coming through this line. Slow and steady. Alright, it looks like just a few small bubbles still trickling through, so we're going to go ahead and start turning the port again, making sure your motors aren't moving. And here come a whole bunch of air bubbles. This is what was in the cylinder. Just going to keep turning the helm until all these bubbles are gone. It looks pretty clear to me. So now we'll go back to starboard, see if we can get those last few bubbles out. Go check in the cabin, make sure we're not making a giant mess. Alright, so just down here at the autopilot pump, checking for leaks. And I see, and you might have just seen that drip, got a very slow leak coming from this adapter fitting. So I'm going to believe it's 3/4 inch. Go get a 3/4 inch wrench and snug that up, and that should be the end of our leak. Alright, so I had to yank the battery out again, but I believe our leak is right here. Got that snugged down, and while I was at it, I've got our reservoir compensating line routed a little better away from the electrical. So let's keep bleeding the system and see what happens. And because the steering cylinder rotates a little bit as the motors move, I'm going to go back here and manually swing them from side to side to purge the last remainder of air. And while you're doing this, I've done it before, so I know my fittings won't hit, but on some motors your bleed fittings will turn up so high that the steering arm will hit them. Alright, so that is the completion of the bleed. Now we would go ahead and close our bleed fittings and disconnect everything. But because we just installed the autopilot pump, I'm going to hook our battery back up and then mess around with that, see if I can manually turn port and starboard and see if I can circulate some fluid and maybe get any air out of the pump itself. All right, we're going to turn on the boat for the first time with autopilot, and we will see what happens. All right, so the autopilot pump is working. We have the bleed fittings open and hitting the steering arrows. You can see it's pushing bubbles through the system. So we're just going to keep doing this until there are no more bubbles. And then we'll close the bleed fittings, and then it'll actually steer the boat. All right, I'm pretty sure there's still some very small bubbles coming out. I'm pretty sure those are just from our bleed fittings on the cylinder themselves being loose. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten those up. All right, so we're going to turn left and see if our motors turn left. And they did. Now we're going to turn right, make sure they turn right. And they do. So I am happy about that. All right, we're done. We're going to close everything up and pack it up, call it a day. All right, so we finished our autopilot install, and it's time to head to the water and do the calibration and test it out and see how we like it. And if you like the video, please like or leave a comment so we can see your feedback. Alright, so I did autopilot engage to see how well it can get us up the Stono River back to Elliott Cut. There is a bridge in the way, so I'll probably have to take over at some point. Beautiful day out here on the river. Got my co-pilot Bridger. Got our autopilot engaged, and just sitting back and relaxing, enjoying a nice Friday afternoon.